Big Sister's Clothes.
It started out a pretty ordinary sort of day. It was the holidays, and there was no school. So as soon as the two girls got up, they started playing. They played with their dolls in the room. They went down to breakfast and played with their eggy soldiers. And they went out to the garden and played on the swings. And Daisy decided it was shaping up into quite a nice day, because the thing she really liked best of all was playing with her big sister. But then it all started to go very wrong. "Come on, Debbie," said their mum. "It's time to go to Girl Guides." "Me come too, said Daisy, jumping up and down. "Don't be silly," said Mum. "You have to be 7 to join the Girl Guides." Daisy felt a bit cross about that. Still, it would be fun when Debbie got home. But when Debbie did get home, she didn't have any time to play. She had to work on her school project. "Can I work on my school project?" asked Daisy. But Mum just laughed. "Don't be silly," she said. "You don't even go to proper school yet." And Daisy felt a bit cross about that as well. After that, it was time for bed. "I'll take you up," said Dad, picking Daisy up off the sofa. "What about Debbie?" said Daisy. "She can stay up later," said Dad, "because she's the big sister." And that, thought Daisy, is that. Now I'm really cross. Really, really. "It's not fair," she wailed. "When am I going to be the big sister?" Dad paused for a second. "Well, never," he said. "Debbie's always going to be the big sister. And you're always going to be the little sister." But Daisy was so cross she couldn't even finish the sentence. "That's just the way it is," said Dad. "Night, Titch," said Debbie. And after that, Daisy sat in bed, and she felt so angry. She felt she might explode. "Never to be the big sister," she thought to herself. "It's just not fair." She was about to close her eyes when suddenly she saw a fairy at the bottom of her bed. "Who are you?" she asked. The fairy skipped across to Daisy's pillow. "I'm the Age Fairy," she said. "The Age Fairy?" asked Daisy. "What's that?" And then it dawned on her. Can you help little sisters who really want to be big sisters?" The fairy nodded, but only if they really want to. "I really do," said Daisy. "Really, really." And so the fairy skipped into the wardrobe. She waved her wand, and then she pointed to a red dress. "I've turned that into Big Sister's clothes," she said. "Just put on that dress, and suddenly you'll be the big sister, and Debbie will be the little sister." And then the fairy vanished. And as she closed her eyes and went to sleep, Daisy was wondering what it might be like to be the big sister for a change. She was a bit frightened, but also excited, because big sisters seemed to have so much fun. The next morning, Daisy woke up early. She was really excited about being the big sister, so she snuck into the wardrobe and put on the red dress. And suddenly she was the big sister. "Oh my gosh," she said. "This is so amazing." She whirled around a little bit. And then she saw that Debbie was waking up, and Debbie was the little sister. "I want to play with you," said Debbie, holding out her favourite doll. But just now Daisy wasn't sure she wanted to play with Debbie. She was enjoying being 7 a bit too much. "In a minute," she said. "I want to play with you now!" shrieked Debbie. And then Dad walked into the room, carrying a cup of coffee and a newspaper. And Debbie was crying and crying about how she wanted to play with her big sister and stamping her foot and going bright red in the face. "Well, just play with her for a bit, will you, Daisy?" said Dad. But Daisy didn't really want to. "But, Dad—" "Great, thanks," said Dad, walking out of the room. And so Daisy had to play with her little sister just to cheer her up. "Daisy! Daisy, where are you?" shouted Mum, running into the room. "What?" said a startled Daisy. "You haven't taken the dog out," shouted Mum. "She's barking and barking." So Daisy put on her coat and walked outside with the dog. But the dog was quite strong and was pulling her this way and that, and she was feeling quite cold. So she was relieved when she got inside, because she was really hungry now and needed some hot breakfast. "Sorry," said Debbie when Daisy arrived at the table. "I thought you'd gone out, so I ate your eggy soldiers." screamed Daisy. "Now, don't argue, girls," said Mum. "But she ate my breakfast," shouted Daisy. "Well, she's only small. She can't help it," said Mum. "I'll get you some muesli instead." "I don't like muesli," grumped Daisy. "Well, you have to eat it because you're a big girl and you have to eat healthy foods." "I want a chocolate milkshake," said Daisy. "Don't be silly," said Mum. And so Daisy had 2 spoonfuls of muesli, but she really couldn't eat any more than that because it was yucky. And when she had finished, she thought she would go out on the swings to play. "Where are you going, young lady?" said Mum. "To the swings," said Daisy. "Not until you've tidied your room," said Mum. "Done what?" Daisy was shocked and horrified. She'd never tidied her room. Not ever. "Go on, quick," said Mum. So Daisy trudged upstairs, and on the bedroom floor, Debbie had pulled lots of toys out of their boxes and spread them everywhere, and now Daisy had to pick them all up. "It's so unfair," she said out loud. Finally she was finished, and she went back downstairs. Maybe at last she could go out to the garden and play. "What about your project?" said Dad. My... But Daisy was speechless. "It has to be finished today," said Dad. "Just a minute," said Daisy firmly, and she went back upstairs to her bedroom. She went to the wardrobe and she took off the red dress, and she put on a little girl's dress instead, so that suddenly she was the little sister again. "I want to play with you," she said to Debbie when she went back downstairs again. "Oh, I'm busy now," said Debbie. "That's okay," said Daisy sweetly. "I'll go and play in the garden by myself." She played by herself for the rest of the morning and decided that being the little sister wasn't so bad after all.
The Grumpy King.
It all began a week or so ago, when the wicked queen who turned Bertie into a frog was taking a walk by the pond in the palace gardens. She stopped by to have a long chat with Colin. They get on rather well, you know. Colin asked how her royal wickedness was doing, and she started on ever such a long grumble. She moaned about the little children who were always leaving their toys lying around the throne room, and Barker, the stupid palace dog, who runs up and slobbers over her hand, even though she doesn't like animals. And above all, she complained about the king. "He just isn't royal enough," she said. "He's so disgustingly nice. He's always showing mercy, when what's needed is a good bit of old-fashioned punishment."
"Oh, yes, your gracious wicked majesty," agreed Colin. "You are so right. There's not enough flogging these days."
Quite. That's just how I feel," said the Queen. "Only the other day the cook brought me a plate of spaghetti bolognese, and when I tried to eat it, the spaghetti was in knots and the tomato sauce squirted over my new dress. I screamed, 'Off with her head, right this minute!' And the king said, 'No, my dear, show a little mercy.' Mercy? How I hate that word!"
"Exactly. What use is mercy to anybody? If I were king, I would make sure things were done properly,"
said Colin. "You seem like a jolly sensible fish. I'm sure you would make a fine king."
"In fact, I often wish that a fine fish like me could be king. Then everything would be right in the world."
"Well, in that case, your wish can come true." And with that, the wicked queen took out her magic wand and started to mutter a magic spell. "Abradabra, fishy stew. Colin shall be king, and the king shall be you." The sky went dark, and a chill wind blew over the pond. Big waves buffeted the frogs and the tadpoles, and sent the ducks and swans squawking onto the banks looking for shelter. And as for Colin, he found himself sitting on a throne studded with diamonds.
"Can this be true?"
he said to himself.
"I'm all horribly dry, and I'm breathing air, and I'm human. Oh, my head feels jolly heavy. That must be my incredibly clever brain."
But it wasn't Colin's brain that weighed so heavily on his head. It was a golden crown. For the wicked queen had turned Colin into a king. And the real king was swimming around at the bottom of the pond. It took Colin a little while to realise what had happened, and just as he was still feeling a little confused, a servant in red livery announced that the lovely Princess Beatrice was about to enter the chamber, leading a group of the smallest and sweetest little girls who lived in the palace.
"I know just who Princess Beatrice is,"
said King Colin.
"It's that frilly, fluffy-brained princess that Bertie's always going on about. I bet she's not that lovely at all. I bet she's really snotty and horrible."
But when the lovely Princess Beatrice kissed his hand, wished him good morning, and said how handsome he was looking that day, Colin thought to himself,
Actually, she's not that bad after all.
And found that his face was smiling back at her. Smiling was rather strange to him, because when he was a fish, all he could do was gawp. Smiling felt, well, rather nice. The little girls who had come with Beatrice were all wearing pink dresses, and they all did pretty little curtsies. Just then, Colin realised that the wicked queen was sitting on a throne next to his. She leaned over and whispered in his ear, "Don't you think those little girls are perfectly revolting? Let me turn them all into tadpoles and send them to eat green slime in the pond."
My dear, said Colin, you can't do that. Children are the future of our kingdom.
Well, all right then. I suppose you are right, unfortunately. The Queen slipped her magic wand back into her handbag and told the children to be off to their lessons right away. When they had gone, Colin said, I think I shall be called King Colin the Wise. Because, you see, I'm jolly briny. And the Queen pulled a face at him when he wasn't looking. Next, the Chamberlain came in and asked His Majesty what he wanted for lunch that day. The cook recommends either sausages and beans or fish fingers and chips, he said.
Fish fingers,
spluttered King Colin. And then he remembered that after all, these were only foolish human beings who did not know any better. He calmed down and said, Tell the cook never to make fish fingers again. I'll have flies for lunch, lightly fried with a little butter and with a touch of green algae on top. Later in the morning, the Chancellor, who was in charge of all the gold and treasure in the kingdom, came to consult with the king. He said that they had collected more money than expected, and he was wondering what they should spend it on. Oh, that's wonderful, said the lovely Princess Beatrice. Now we can afford to build a new children's hospital for all the little ones who are poorly. When the wicked queen heard this, she was furious. You stupid girl, she screeched. What on earth makes you think we would want to waste good treasure on some snotty-nosed kids who are silly enough to get sick? Let's spend the money on a new palace. This one's getting shabby.
No, my dear, said King Colin. The lovely Princess Beatrice makes a good point. This palace is splendid enough. We shall build a hospital for the children, and while we are about it, let's make sure there is an underwater wing of the hospital especially for sick fish. And as both the Chancellor and the lovely Princess Beatrice said that King Colin was extremely wise, the decision to build the hospital was made. And so the day went on, until King Colin went out in his golden carriage drawn by 6 white horses and was cheered by all the people who saw him drive past. Colin waved back at the people and practised smiling. He thought how pleasant it was to be so popular and to be loved by one and all for his generosity and wisdom. It was far better to be known throughout the ages as King Colin the Wise than King Colin the Grumpy. He drove to the Prime Minister's house and told him that he wanted to make a new law right away. The new law, said Colin, is that fishing is banned with immediate effect.
How very wise you are, Your Majesty, said the Prime Minister. Just then Colin heard some more cheers, even louder this time.
Ah, my people are hailing King Colin the Wise,
he said. Actually, said the Prime Minister, they are cheering the palace football team. It sounds like they've scored a goal in the cup final.
Bah,
said Colin.
Football's banned. The people are only allowed to cheer me.
And with that, he strutted out of the Prime Minister's house and drove home to the palace in a huff. The cook served flies for lunch. King Colin thought they were a little overdone and not as juicy as they used to be in the pond. But he did not say anything because he was enjoying watching the Foreign Minister putting the flies on the end of his fork and looking rather queasy. The Queen secretly made a magic spell and turned her own flies into chocolate truffles while Colin wasn't noticing. She mentioned quietly that she had heard a rumour that some of the people were a tiny bit unhappy about football being banned.
I've an idea,
said Colin to the Foreign Minister.
Let's have a short, glorious war that will cheer the people up.
Who against? Asked the Foreign Minister.
Oh, just anyone, said King Colin, just as long as they are smaller than us.
That is very wise, said the Foreign Minister. As they were finishing lunch, an angry great roar could be heard all around the palace. There was the sound of battering on the front door, and a shot or two was fired in the air. Oh dear, said the Foreign Minister. It sounds like the people are pretty angry.
Angry? Said Colin. How dare they be angry? I'm the most popular king in all history. I shall go up on the balcony and address my people. They will calm down when they hear the words of King Colin the Wise. Up on the balcony, Colin saw a vast ocean of angry faces surrounding the palace. Many of them were wearing blue paint on their faces and waving flags. They were football supporters, you see. They began to chant, "Knick-knack, paddywhack, give a fish a throw. Splish, splash, whacky thwack, send him splashing home. Friends, humans, countrymen, fish," called out Colin. And before he could finish his speech, he was pelted with rotten eggs and tomatoes. But King Colin the Wise was brave and steadfast. He continued with his speech. Football is a noble game. Football is a beautiful game, played on the field of honour. At this, the people were a little quieter because they liked football. And some of the teachers in the crowd told everyone to hush and listen to what the king had to say. I am building a bigger and brighter future for the kingdom. There will be sweeties for the little children and moist lettuce leaves for the fluffy bunny rabbits. Now most of the people were listening. But a little boy at the back of the crowd called out something very rude about Colin. Can you guess what he shouted? You can't. Well, I'll tell you. He called King Colin the Wise Cod face. Cod face? Exclaimed King Colin. I'll have you know that I was once a champion carp. When they heard this, everyone laughed, because although Colin was a human king, his face did look rather, well, fishy. His skin was somewhat scaly, his eyes were big and bulging, and his throat was droopy.
In fact, when the lovely Princess Beatrice had told him that he was looking handsome, she had been telling just a little white lie, because, as always, she's ever so kind. Colin grew very angry when the people laughed at him and started to splutter.
Well, the least you could do is stop kicking a stupid football and go back to work and earn some taxes for the Treasury.
The wicked Queen, who was listening to all this, could not hold back any longer. She picked up a microphone inside her chamber and shouted into it so that everybody could hear her voice echoing around the palace grounds and even in the town square.
Too right! Everyone should work harder, you lazy, ungrateful lot. I want a new palace!
Now there was uproar. The crowd was turning very, very angry.
Okay, you can have your lovely game of football,
shouted Colin, but nobody could hear him. Some of the most angry people were climbing up the drain pipes of the palace and into the balcony. King Colin became frightened and rushed back inside. He saw the wicked Queen and called out to her,
My dear Queen, save us! The people are revolting!
They are perfectly revolting, agreed the Queen. But then she added, The old king might have been a nincompoop, but at least he knew how to score goals for the palace football team. And with that, she pointed her magic wand at King Colin and shouted, Fish! Flash! And Colin found himself wet once again and breathing underwater. He heard a squeaky voice saying, Colin, what's your favourite colour? He turned around and saw a little tiny silly tadpole called Tim. Normally, he would have been highly irritated by such a pointless little question, but today he found it rather comforting to see little Tim.
I dunno,
said Colin.
In fact, I don't know anything very much. Just an ignorant old fish, you see. All I do is go for a swim all day.
And with that, he managed to turn his gulp into almost a smile.
Bertie Valentine.
Have you heard about Valentine's Day? It's a very special day. Every year on the 14th of February, you send cards to people you love and care about. And if there is someone you have been secretly admiring, you can send them a card and not say who it is from. Now, doesn't that sound very exciting and mysterious? Anyway, a few days ago, I was going for a walk, and I was thinking about who I might send a Valentine's card to this year, when I walked past the pond where Prince Bertie the Frog lives with all his friends. And I saw Bertie sitting there, looking very sad. Tim the Tadpole was trying to cheer him up. "Let's go for a walk, Bertie," said Tim.
You haven't got any legs, Tim,
said Bertie. "Let's play hopscotch."
No,
snapped Bertie. "Or skipping?" Bertie looked blankly at his legless little friend, as if he were rather a silly little tadpole, which of course he was.
Come on, Bertie,
said Colin the grumpy carp.
There's nothing like a good old moan to improve everybody's mood. 1, 2, 3.
When I saw how my friend Bertie looked, I felt rather sorry for him, and I knelt down by the edge of the pond. "Why so sad?" I asked. Bertie blushed a shade of deepest green and got all shy. He sighed a bit and at length said, "Well, let me tell you a story, and it will all become clear." As his story was rather short, I'll just tell it to you quickly. Once upon a time, there was a handsome, brave and gallant prince who was engaged to be married to a beautiful princess. Then one day a wicked queen got rather cross and shouted out a magic spell that turned him into a frog. For a whole year he sat on a lily leaf and cried big fat tears. But then on a bright wintry day, his princess came wandering by the pond. She saw the sad little creature, picked him up in her hand and kissed him. For you see, although he was a frog, he was still terribly handsome, and she just couldn't resist his charms. No sooner had she kissed him than he turned back into a prince, and they got married and lived happily ever after. The end. When I heard the story, I knew what Bertie meant. He was hoping for a Valentine's Day kiss from the lovely Princess Beatrice, for that would turn him back into a prince. But Colin the Carp was far from convinced.
"Boring,"
he said.
"Fairy tales are always ending in soppy kisses and happy ever after. But that's because they're made up. If you ask me, which nobody ever does around this pond, in real life, no self-respecting princess would kiss an ugly little frog, not even if you gave her a whole palace made of gold and filled to the top of its towers with pearls, frilly dresses, diamond tiaras and girls allowed CDs. Not even then could she bring herself to kiss Bertie."
Just then, Sadie the swan glided across the pond. "Oh, yes, she could," she said. "Princesses are always on the lookout for frogs to kiss. It's their royal duty. We must lure the lovely Princess Beatrice to walk past the pond on Valentine's Day, when she's in her most dreamy and romantic mood. And she's sure to kiss Bertie, because being a true princess, she'll just know that really he's a handsome prince under a magic spell." So all the pond life thought very hard about how to get the lovely Princess Beatrice to walk past the pond and see Bertie. They thought and thought, and Tim was thinking so hard he fell over backwards. And then Sadie came up with a clever plan, because Sadie knows all about Valentine's Day and usually gets dozens of cards from swans all over the world. "I know," she said. "We'll ask Natasha to send an announcement to the palace radio station. Princess Beatrice will hear it, and she'll know it was meant for her. And she'll come down to the pond, plant a kiss on Bertie, and they will both live happily ever after." "Gosh, I'd say that's really a jolly clever plan, Sadie," said Bertie. And so it was done. On Valentine's Day, the royal DJ was playing romantic, soppy love songs, And in between records, he was reading out even gooier Valentine's messages. It was all rather boring, really. But everyone in the palace was listening out, just in case they heard a message that was meant for them. Eventually, he read out the lines for Princess Beatrice. But because it was a Valentine's message, and meant to be sort of secret, it didn't actually mention any names. The DJ purred.
Greetings, royal pop pickers. Here's a message to get young hearts beating. Not half. If you go down to the palace pond today, only kiss a frog and your every wish will come true. All right? Stay bright. And now, here's a cool chart topper from years gone by. Save all your kisses for me by the Brotherhood of Man.
All the girls who lived in the palace and in the houses nearby heard the message on the palace radio, and each of them wondered who would be the lucky girl who found the right frog to kiss, and whose every wish would come true. And the same thought popped through the heads of quite a few of them. I wonder if maybe, just maybe, it might be me. Even I thought the same for a moment. And then I remembered that I'm not a true princess, just Bertie's special storyteller. And so my wishes wouldn't come true, even if I did kiss him. So I decided not to, after all. On Valentine's Day, His Royal Highness Prince Bertie the Frog peeked out from behind his lily pad and looked at his reflection in the pond. His skin was a nice shiny shade of green. He sipped up some water and swilled away all the traces of green slime from around his mouth. It was a pity that he couldn't do anything about the bumps on his head and back, but all the same, he was certain that if the lovely Princess Beatrice felt like kissing a frog that morning, it had to be him. The mood on the pond was terribly romantic. He could see that Sadie had already received a sackful of Valentine cards. Tim had received one from his mum, and Colin had received one as well from Chloe Carp, and he was swimming around in quite an excited way. But actually, that card was from Bertie playing a joke on him. Bertie couldn't wait for the lovely Princess Beatrice to come down and kiss him. So he hopped up onto the bank of the pond and looked out across to the palace. Soon a small girl came along, and immediately as she saw Bertie, she cooed, "Oh, look, Nanny, a frog! Let me kiss him quick, and all my wishes will come true." Bertie tried to hop away as fast as he could, but the girl's brother caught him and held Bertie up to his sister's lips. "Go on now," said the boy, who was really rather horrid. "Kissy, kissy." "Oh!" said the girl, scrunching up her face. "He's so shiny and green, quite the ugliest little creature I ever did see. But I'm sure that he'll turn into a prince if I kiss him, so I suppose I just better get on with it." And she closed her eyes and kissed Bertie. Bertie thought the kiss was perfectly horrible, and he wriggled and wriggled trying to escape. But the boy thought it was hilarious, and he put Bertie in his satchel and took him to school. In the playground, the girls queued up and paid the boy with their pocket money, or toffee apples, or chewy sweets, and each one of them kissed Bertie to see if he would turn into a prince for them. And each one of them was disappointed that nothing happened, because none of them was a true princess. Some of them even burst into tears. It was a very miserable Bertie who eventually hopped back to the pond after receiving more kisses than he could count. He was about to dive into the slimy green water when he saw Princess Beatrice. She was walking down to the pond, looking for a frog to kiss. For when she heard the message on the radio, she suspected that her wicked stepmother might have turned her beloved Prince Bertie into a frog, because she hadn't seen or heard from him in quite a while now, and she knew that she must find him and kiss him. Bertie became ever so excited and started to hop up and down. But Beatrice didn't see him. Instead, she spotted old Tommy Frog, Tim the Tadpole's grandfather, who'd been sent down to check that Tim had received his card. "Beatrice, my darling!" Bertie tried to cry out, but the only sound that came out of his mouth was a big croak. And Princess Beatrice was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't even hear his croaking. Instead, she knelt down and gave old Grandfather Tommy a kiss. He got the shock of his ancient life and dived straight back into the pond. "I wish that Prince Bertie would come home soon," said Beatrice, before adding, I'm not sure that I really like kissing frogs, but I suppose it's my royal duty once in a while." And then she turned around and headed straight back into the palace. And Bertie felt a bit sad about that. But then he cheered up, because he knew that the lovely Princess Beatrice still loved him and was thinking about him on Valentine's Day and wishing that he would come home. And as Bertie went to sleep under his lily, he could see Colin the Carp swimming around, looking at his card and saying,
"I wonder who Chloe Carp is."
And that's the true story, Nori, of Bertie's Valentine's Day.
Dick Whittington and his cat.
In the reign of the famous King Edward III, there was a little boy called Dick Whittington, whose father and mother died when he was very young. As poor Dick was not old enough to work, he was very badly off. He got but little for his dinner, and sometimes nothing at all for his breakfast, for the people who lived in the village were very poor indeed, and could not spare him much more than the parings of potatoes and now and then a hard crust of bread. Now Dick had heard many, many very strange things about the great city called London. For the country people at that time thought that folks in London were all fine gentlemen and ladies, and that there was singing and music there all day long, and that the streets were all paved with gold. One day, a large wagon and 8 horses, all with bells at their heads, drove through the village while Dick was standing by the signpost. He thought that this wagon must be going to the fine town of London. So he took courage and asked the driver to let him travel with him. And so they set off together. Dick got safe to London and was in such a hurry to see the fine street paved all over with gold that he did not even stay to thank the kind wagon driver, but ran off as fast as his legs would carry him, through many of the streets, thinking every moment to come to those that were paved with gold. He thought that if he just took some little bits of the pavement, he should then have as much money as he could ever wish for. Poor Dick ran until he was tired, But at last, finding that every way he turned he saw nothing but dirt instead of gold, he sat down in a dark corner and cried himself to sleep. Little Dick was all night in the streets, and next morning, being very hungry, he got up and walked about and asked everybody he met to give him half a penny to keep him from starving. But nobody stayed to answer him, and only 2 or 3 gave him a half-penny, so that the poor boy was quite soon weak and faint with hunger. He asked another man for money, who replied, "Go to work, you lazy rogue." "That I will," said Dick. "I will go to work for you, if you will let me." But the man only cursed at him and went on. At last, a good-natured looking gentleman saw how hungry he looked. "Why don't you go to work, my lad?" said he to Dick. "That I would, but I do not know how to get any," answered Dick. "If you are willing, come along with me," said the gentleman, and took him to a hayfield, where Dick worked briskly and lived merrily till the hay was made. After this, he found himself as badly off as before, and being almost starved again, he laid himself down at the door of Mr. Fitzwarren, a rich merchant. Here he was soon seen by the cookmaid, who was an ill-tempered creature, and happened just then to be very busy making dinner for her master and mistress. So she called out to poor Dick, "What business have you there, you lazy rogue? There is nothing else but beggars. If you do not take yourself away, we will see how you will like to have some dishwater emptied over your head. I have some here hot enough to make you jump." Just at that time, Mr. Fitzwarren himself came home to dinner, and when he saw a dirty, ragged boy lying at the door, he said to him, "Why do you lie there, my boy? You seem old enough to work. I am afraid you are inclined to be lazy." "No, indeed, sir," said Dick to him. "That is not the case, for I would work with all my heart, but I do not know anybody, and I believe I am very sick for the want of food." "Poor fellow, get up. Let me see what's up with you." Dick now tried to rise, but was obliged to lie down again, being too weak to stand, for he had not eaten any food for 3 days, and was no longer able to run about and beg a half-penny off people in the street. So the kind merchant ordered him to be taken into the house and have a good dinner given him, and be kept to do what work he was able to do for the cook. Little Dick would have lived very happy in this good family if it had not been for the ill-natured cook. She used to say, "You are under me, so look sharp. Clean the spit and the dripping pan, make the fires, wind up the jack, and do all the scullery work nimbly, or—" and she would shake the ladle at him. Besides, she was so fond of basting that when she had no meat to baste, she would baste poor Dick's head and shoulders with a broom, or anything else that happened to fall in her way. At last, her ill usage of him was told to Alice, Mr. Fitzwarren's daughter, who told the cook she should be turned away if she did not treat him kinder. The behaviour of the cook was now a little better, but besides this, Dick had another hardship to get over. His bed stood in an attic room, where there were so many holes in the floor and the walls that every night he was tormented with rats and mice. A gentleman had given Dick a penny for cleaning his shoes, so he thought he would buy a cat with it. The next day he saw a girl with a cat and asked her, "Will you let me have that cat for a penny?" The girl said, "Yes, I will, though she is an excellent mouser." Dick hid his cat in the garret and always took care to carry a part of his dinner to her, and in a short time he had no more trouble with the rats and mice, but slept quite sound every night. Soon after this, his master had a ship ready to sail, and as it was the custom that all his servants should have some chance for good fortune as well as himself, he called them all into the parlour and asked them what they would send out with him for trade overseas. They all had something that they were willing to trade, except poor Dick, who had neither money nor goods, and therefore could send nothing. For this reason he did not come into the parlour with the rest, but Miss Alice guessed what was the matter, and ordered him to be called in. She then said, "I will lay down some money for him, from my own purse." But her father told her, "This will not do, for it must be something of his own." When poor Dick heard this, he said, "I have nothing but a cat, which I bought for a penny some time since of a little girl." "Fetch your cat then, my lad." Dick went upstairs and brought down the poor puss, with tears in his eyes, and gave her to the captain. For he said, "I shall now be kept awake all night by the rats and mice." All the company laughed at Dick's odd trade, and Miss Alice, who felt pity for him, gave him some money to buy another cat. This, and many other marks of kindness shown him by Miss Alice, made the ill-tempered cook jealous of poor Dick, and she began to use him more cruelly than ever, and always teased of him for sending his cat to sea. She asked him, "Do you think your cat will sell for as much money as would buy a stick to beat you?" At last, poor Dick could not bear this ill treatment any longer, and he thought he would run away from his place. So he packed up a few of his things and started very early in the morning, on All Hallows Day, the 1st of November. He walked as far as Holloway, and there sat down on a stone, which to this day is called Whittington Stone, and began to think to himself which road he should take. While he was thinking what he should do, the bells of Bow Church, which at that time were only 6, began to ring, and at their sound they seemed to say to him, "Turn again, Whittington, thrice Lord Mayor of London." "Lord Mayor of London," said he to himself. "Why, to be sure, I will put up with almost anything now to be Lord Mayor of London, and ride in a fine coach when I grow to be a man. Well, I will go back and think nothing of smacking and scolding of the old cook if I am to be Lord Mayor of London at last." Dick went back and was lucky enough to get into the house and set about his work before the old cook came downstairs. We must now follow Miss Puss to the coast of Africa. The ship with the cat on board was a long time at sea, and was at last driven by the winds on a part of the coast of Barbary, where the only people were the Moors, unknown to the English. The people came in great numbers to see the sailors, and treated them civilly, and when they became better acquainted, were very eager to buy the fine things that the ship was loaded with. The king of the country summoned the captain to the palace. The king and queen were seated at the upper end of the room, and a number of dishes were brought in for dinner. They had not sat long when a vast number of rats and mice rushed in, and devoured all the meat in an instant. The captain wondered at this, and asked if these rats and mice were not unpleasant. "Oh, yes," said they, "very offensive." And the king would give half his treasure to be freed of them, for they not only destroy his dinner, as you see, but they run over him in his chamber, and even in his bed, so that he is obliged to be watched while he is sleeping for fear of them. The captain jumped for joy. He remembered poor Whittington and his cat, and told the king he had a creature on board the ship that would deal with all these rats and mice immediately. The king jumped so high at the joy which the news gave him that his turban dropped off his head. "Bring this creature to me," says he. "Rats are dreadful in a court, and if she will do what you say, I will load your ship with gold and jewels in exchange for her." "Run, run," said the queen. "I am impatient to see the dear creature." Away went the captain to his ship, while another dinner was got ready. He put Puss under his arm, and arrived at the palace just in time to see the table full of rats. When the cat saw them, she did not wait for his bidding, but jumped out of the captain's arms, and in a few minutes laid almost all the rats and mice dead at her feet. The rest of them, in their fright, scampered away to their holes. The king was quite delighted to get rid so easily of such plagues, and the queen desired that the creature who had done them so great a kindness might be brought to her, that she might look at her. Upon which the captain called, "Pussy, pussy, pussy," and she came to him. He then presented her to the queen, who started back, and was afraid to touch a creature who had made such a havoc among the rats and mice. However, when the captain stroked the cat and called, "Pussy, pussy," the queen also touched her and cried, "Putty, putty." He then put her down on the queen's lap, where she purred and played with her majesty's hand, and then purred herself to sleep. The king, having seen the exploits of Miss Puss, and being informed that her kittens would stock the whole country and keep it free from rats, bargained with the captain for the whole ship's cargo, and then gave him 10 times as much for the cat as all the rest amounted to. The captain then took leave of the royal party and set sail with a fair wind for England, and after a happy voyage arrived safe in London. One morning early, Mr. Fitzwarren had just come to his counting house and seated himself at the desk to count over the cash and settle the business for the day, when somebody came tap, tap, tap at the door. "Who's there?" "I come to bring you good news of your ship Unicorn." The merchant, bustling up in such a hurry that he forgot his gout, opened the door, and who should he see waiting but the captain and accountant with a cabinet of jewels. When he looked at this, the merchant lifted up his eyes and thanked heaven for sending him such a prosperous voyage. They then told the story of the cat and showed the rich present that the king and queen had sent for her to poor Dick. As soon as the merchant heard this, he called out to his servant, "Go send him in, and tell him of his fame. Pray call him Mr. Whittington by name." Mr. Fitzwarren now showed himself to be a good man. For when some of his servants said so great a treasure was too much for him, he answered, "God forbid I should deprive him of the value of a single penny. It is his own, and he shall have it to a farthing." He then sent for Dick, who at that time was scouring pots for the cook, and was quite dirty. He would have excused himself from coming into the counting-house, saying, "The room is swept, and my shoes are dirty and full of hobnails." But the merchant ordered him to come in. Mr. Fitzwarren ordered a chair to be set for him, and so Dick began to think that they were making a game of him, and at the same time said to them, "Do not play tricks with a poor simple boy, but let me go down again, if you please, to my work." "Indeed, Mr. Whittington," said the merchant, "we are all quite in earnest with you, and I most heartily rejoice in the news that these gentlemen have brought you. For the captain has sold your cat to the King of Barbary, and brought you in return for her more riches than I possess in the whole world, and I wish you may long enjoy them." Mr. Fitzwarren then told the men to open the great treasure they had brought with them, and said, "Mr. Whittington has nothing to do but to put it in some place of safety." Poor Dick hardly knew how to behave himself for joy. He begged his master to take what part of it he pleased, since he owed it all to his kindness. "No, no," answered Mr. Fitzwarren. "This is all your own, and I have no doubt but you will use it well." Dick next asked his mistress, and then Miss Alice, to accept a part of his good fortune, but they would not, and at the same time told him that they felt great joy at his good success. But this poor fellow was too kind-hearted to keep it all to himself. So he made a present to the captain, the mate, and the rest of Mr. Fitzwarren's servants, and even to the ill-natured old cook. After this, Mr. Fitzwarren advised him to send for a proper tailor, and to get himself dressed like a gentleman, and told him he was welcome to live in his house till he could buy a better one. When Whittington's face was washed, his hair curled, his hat cocked, and he was dressed in a nice suit of clothes, he was as handsome and genteel as any young man who visited at Mr. Fitzwarren's, so that Miss Alice, who had once been so kind to him and thought of him with pity, now looked upon him as fit to be her sweetheart, and the more so, no doubt, because Whittington was now always thinking what he could do to oblige her, and making her the prettiest presents that could ever be. Mr. Fitzwarren soon saw their love for each other, and proposed to join them in marriage, and to this they both readily agreed. A day for the wedding was soon fixed, and they were attended to church by the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen, the sheriffs, and a great number of the richest merchants in London, whom they afterwards treated with a very rich feast. History tells us that Mr. Whittington and his lady lived in great splendour and were very happy. They had several children. He became Sheriff of London, thrice Lord Mayor, and received the honour of knighthood by Henry V.